Welcome, everyone, to today's seminar hosted by the Berkeley PharmaTech Foundation. My name is Van Nguyen, and I'm the founder of the nonprofit. Our mission is to increase access for scientists and entrepreneurs in biotech through education, mentorship, and professional opportunities. We're honored to be sponsored by the Ernie McNabb Foundation. Through the speaker series, industry leaders share insights on cutting-edge biotech innovation, career development, and entrepreneurship. Our goal is to foster a community where scientists and builders learn from real experiences and grow together. To get involved, follow us on LinkedIn for updates. Stay tuned for our upcoming seminars and conferences, and feel free to reach out to me to explore more ways to engage with our mission. I just wanted to quickly introduce Jennifer Gibson. Jennifer is a health tech product and operations executive with 18 plus years of experience building and scaling AI-enabled healthcare platforms across employer, consumer, and enterprise markets. She has led solutions from concepts to 100,000 plus users, integrating biometric, behavioral, and clinical data to deliver measurable gains in engagement and outcomes. Passionate about making healthcare more human, accessible, and intelligent, she brings deep expertise in product strategy, cross-functional leadership, and data-driven execution. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer.
Thank you, Van Loan. Thank you for the lovely introduction. So nice to be here with everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join, and I'm looking forward to a very engaging discussion. I'm going to share my screen here. I also would love to make sure that I am able to see the chats. So I'd love to make this a very interactive discussion so that we can all engage with each other. And would love to start off by just hearing from the group. Maybe you can put it in the chat while I do a quick intro about your role or your job and also where you're located. I'd love to understand where everyone's at in the world. And I'm going to pop this up to large. And while you're doing that, just a little bit about me. Van Loa did a great job of opening up with an introduction about myself. As she mentioned, I've been in the healthcare space for about 18 years. I am currently the co-founder and CEO of an organization called Zella, and we are a system of intelligence and action that layers on top of existing electronic medical records to really help them modernize their workflows. And so I am deep in this space and definitely is something I'm working on every day as I manage that organization. I also do advisory across health tech, often for early stage companies, and I'm very excited and interested and an optimist about where things are headed with AI and health tech. And so looking forward to the discussion. So today we'll talk about designing human-centered AI in health tech. And as everyone is well aware of, it is accelerating very fast. I think everyone is trying to keep up and learn, and we're all learning and growing together as we move along. I would say there's very few people that are true experts in AI because it is moving so quickly. And that's part of the fun and excitement that is happening in the space. So I wanted to start by just talking a little bit about the AI landscape in healthcare. What we're really seeing here is that the market is streamlining around a lot of categories in healthcare. Ambient documentation, which has really been around since 2018. Those are your scribes a lot of times. We see many organizations doing these and them getting implemented pretty widely across healthcare. One of the other spaces that's widely utilized is the imaging and device AI space. And that is, is really driven by the FDA. They're starting to open up opportunities for organizations around expansion and regulation, especially in the Gen AI space. There is a lot of action happening in electronic medical records, more native AI components that are going on there. And those are embedding directly into clinician workflows, such as charting, messaging, and administration. And then for patient engagement, we're seeing a lot of movement in areas like coding, revenue cycle automation, risk stratification, and patient-facing chat tools as well. Um, of all of these, the most movement seems to be happening in that ambient speech space, with a lot of future investments leaning towards revenue cycle and patient engagement. And so one of the questions is, how are clinicians using AI today? And we've seen this shift happen quite quickly. So according to recent surveys, 80% of clinicians have awareness or use. 72% can consider themselves active adopters, which the definition for was people that were using AI in one use case at least. And daily users has like drastically increased to 69% of people being daily users. In terms of the most prominent place that clinicians are using AI, or one of the prominent places, about 40% use it for research summaries. And I'd love to hear from everyone on the call just a little bit about how many people on here are daily AI users. Maybe you could just give a yes or no if you use AI daily, and if there's a primary tool or use case that you use regularly. Claude, yeah, Claude is definitely the hot topic. Yeah, Claude everything. Um, yeah, Claude Cowork, Claude Code. There's lots of places to use Claude. Looks like a lot of really active AI users on the call. That's great. App development. Awesome. Great. And so, in terms of the impact on physicians, what they see when they start to use AI among the physicians is they see a 75% reduced admin burden and improved job satisfaction, which is really drastic. They also are reporting 69% better patient care and outcomes. And in terms of just freeing up their time, they're able to see an increased capacity to take on new patients in 49% of the cases. So really drastic, improvements in outcomes and areas like burnout for physicians when they're using AI tools. A quick timeline. I think it's really interesting to look at this, especially just how much AI has exploded in the last couple of years. In 2023, 38% of clinicians reported AI use. We see that start to increase up in 2024 with 48% clinician adoption, and then 31.5% of hospitals starting to use EHR integration. And 31.5% of hospitals in 2025, they have integration. And then another 24.7 were plans for adoption within the year, which would have fallen in 2025. In 2026, 72% of clinicians are incorporating AI. And so that was a huge drastic increase, of almost 40% in 3 years. We see that the people who report that they don't use AI at all was decreased from 34% to 19%. And we're seeing really wide adoption when AI tools are integrated into their workflows. So for ambient notes in the survey of 43 health systems, and ambient notes are scribes generally, and so 100% of respondents reported that they adopted that tool set. So a lot more openness, a lot more understanding of the tools that are getting used in this space. And then if we look on the patient side of things, the use for LLMs in health is exploding. So 32% of adults have used chatbots for health information or advice in the past year. And they're using these for things like looking up symptoms, understanding diagnoses, comparing treatments, deciding whether to seek care at all. We've seen a lot of cases come up in the media about people using it to decide whether they end up in the emergency room. 42% of people that are seeking physical health advice, though, did not end up following up with a clinician when they looked at that data. Um, and even more concerning, 58% of people seeking mental health advice did not follow up with a clinician or mental health professional. And so this is something that is really important for us in healthcare to look at and see how we can continue to improve the experience for patients here. There's a big interest in utilizing these, and at the same time, we need to understand how we are able to integrate it into an already existing healthcare system that has a lot more regulation and compliance embedded into it, so that we're giving the best care for all of the users. And for these LLMs for health, a couple of the cases that have come up, in January, we probably all saw the news release for the ChatGPT Health and also for Claude Healthcare. And so those are a couple that have come out just this year that are focusing directly on making a whole sector for health that will have some additional regulation components on it. Um, and curious from everyone on the call, but how many people here have used an LLM for searching clinical information? And if you're open to it, maybe you can share a little bit about what you used it for. And that could be anything from, chatting in ChatGPT, asking for information about a health condition. I've seen a lot of people upload their lab data into an LLM to understand a little bit more about what's going on with their labs and how it might correlate with other health concerns. But if anyone's willing to share, would love to hear if other people have used that for health
Is it okay
questions.
if I come off mute here to easier
Please.
to typing? Personally, I do like to use it just to identify literature that I should read before
Mm-hmm.
talking to a clinician so we can have an intelligent discussion. I'm one of those patients with a biomedical background, but I understand I'm not the doctor. I have a very narrow scope. So we can talk about, oh, what tests do we need to do? It
Mm-hmm.
just moves things along. And certainly in the software development projects I'm currently involved in, uh, I'm just looking for, I'm fairly new to the software development space and looking for things like open source best practices as it relates to clinical data. That's why I'm asking a lot of these questions about, okay, are people using this in the clinic or are people using this, personally as physicians? Is it better to use an API or do people prefer an API or building a corpus? How much bandwidth do we have for that? I'm doing a lot of asking LLMs about LLM use, at least in my case. Um, so
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Christine. And that's such a great example of like preparing for medical appointments, like how, what kinds of things should I be considering? What questions should I be asking? And I think we're seeing that get used a lot across healthcare and like in our everyday work as well, like LLMs as a thought partner for how we can ask better questions and find out answers that we need to get responses to. Thanks for sharing. Does anyone else have an example they would want to share about where you might have used AI to support for your health? Great. And so I think when we think about AI strategies at the leadership level, one of the things that we always want to be conscientious of is where do AI initiatives often stall? And it's not usually because of the technology. It's often because of the team members or departments that are responsible for these AI initiatives and the coordination there. So when we look at kind of different categories of people, we see products, where as product people are very focused on innovation. We want to move fast. We want to ship features. We want to capture the market. On the clinical side of things, a lot of the clinical team, their focus is around doing no harm. So they're wanting to make sure there's safety and risk parameters put in place they're wanting to make sure things go through clinical validation before they get deployed. They're really looking at it from a clinical lens and making sure that anything that gets rolled out to the organization is going to be responsible and create trust with the patients. On the finance side of things, there's a lot of push, especially from executives, to implement AI strategies. The finance teams are looking at what is the ROI on these initiatives? How do we cost control? How do we prove value before scaling? And how do we make sure that the initiatives that we're putting in place don't have inflated costs, which we see a lot in AI as you start to use some of these tools, that the costs can stack up very quickly. And then on the investor side, they're really looking at scale and defensibility. With AI, the ability to create a moat is much harder. A lot of people can build and develop in the technology space, which makes that moat building a bit more challenging than it was a few years ago, or at least different. And they're looking at companies that are going to grow fast. And so oftentimes what can look like progress in one area can create a lot of risk or distraction in other categories of the organization.
Hey, Jennifer, maybe I can jump in on the investor
Sure.
side because I'm an investor in
Love that.
healthcare, biotech.
Great.
Interesting, I really appreciate kind of the context in where we're talking about relevant contact with AI. And what I'm finding is, and I've been traveling Middle East, Europe, here in the Bay Area as well. And there's really this intersection, and as we're looking at startups that are finding their clinical pathways into treatments, there's this purview of watching where new diagnostics, new treatment therapies are going from linear kind of protocols to more matrix protocols, where there can be more options for physicians on how am I investigating what the options, because there's a lot of breakthrough capabilities in diagnostics. There's therapeutics that are now starting to enter the market. And so we're looking at pathways for startups that are easily integrated into the healthcare system. How are physicians actually getting access to these kind of matrix options about prognosis-based opportunities and care? And so it's really exciting. But then we also look at kind of the beachhead of entering the healthcare system, and where there's going to be an easy adoption path. Usually there's great therapeutics and there's great, but how are they delivering that pathway? Is it an easy protocol to deliver, whether it's I'm going to send a sample out to a diagnostics company, I'm going to get it back to the physician? So we're really we're at this kind of precipice of where AI is kind of consolidating all these great ideas in technology, and how is AI going to help deliver that in the whole kind of clinical pathway for a patient, for a physician to actually be aware of those new technologies and what are those protocols. So it's exciting times. I appreciate just getting an opportunity to kind of jump in and hear what's going on here.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that perspective. I think it's such a great points around like the workflow components of things, like where are these AI tools fitting into physician workflows? And we're seeing a lot of consolidation on, through acquisition in a lot of places. So like the example you gave reminded me of the acquisition of AstraZeneca, and they acquired a company called Modella AI. And that acquisition just happened in January of this year, where they were, these large companies are looking at some of these like growing and early stage companies for how they can acquire that technology to like go directly into their larger set of features. And there it was centered around oncology. So looking for the ability to make diagnoses faster or get drugs to market faster in the oncology space.
You see a lot of, just to add a little bit, I met a leader of medical innovation at Northwestern, and she presented the structure of how they're considering build versus buy kind of alternatives for medicine, and how are they incorporating that into a governance program about that the speed of adoption. So there's a lot of consideration. I like to see that kind of governance play at the very top and finding opportunities to kind of integrate new technologies into their framework. And that's what we'll see more and more as like your field that you're working in, where there's, a lot of consideration for opportunities to introduce AI, whether it's a clinical workflow or a patient, say, working with one that's very detailed into chronic care management, and where there's a lot more opportunities on the reimbursement side to actually leverage those reimbursements and adding value right away in the healthcare space. But it's a really a great time to really be involved in it and really getting your feedback and input into Christine and your kind of like curiosity of like what you're doing. And I think everybody maybe on the call that is leaning in on healthcare and AI is it's exciting. And I think we're, what we see today, it's moving very fast, at velocity, breakneck speed. And to really kind of be able to keep up with it, you've got to really kind of dig in and do your homework, just like you're saying, using tools that are available. I use tools a lot of times to do this kind of comparative analysis on like, what's the difference between this particular diagnostic method versus another? And there's a ton of stuff on, say, oncology, on whether it's protein based or urine based, and there's all kinds of like these diagnostic capabilities. And I'm approached by tons of startups and like, how am I sorting through the differentiation between them? But it's really and they all have a bit of AI included in them. And it's
So
it's a
sorry
fun
to
time.
break in, but I'm just bursting with excitement to hear that there are academics at Northwestern specifically working on incorporating this into chronic care management clinical workflows.
Yes.
That is something that, as a nonprofit project, we're very much interested in, and glad we need the
Yeah.
expertise of doing
Well,
that.
not to confuse those two, Christine. The framework of AI and adoption in Northwestern is really interesting. The other play on the chronic care management was another group out of Nebraska that is like these physicians are really adopting these things, and there's quick returns, and it's fun stuff. Just to help clarify that.
Yeah, it is just an incredible time to be involved in this, and I think it's unprecedented in terms of what we're going to look back and see in terms of progress for over these few years. So I feel very privileged to be here at this time now and be able to be involved, and it's going to be exciting. Great stories we'll be able to tell of all of our time doing this over these years. Great. And I think when we think about a shared framework for AI decisions, there are some things that really make a difference in terms of what we're thinking about for these stakeholders, what we should be asking and how we should be measuring. Sorry, the bottom of my slide looks a little cut off there, but oh, sorry, back through there. And so one of the areas is like, what workflows are we improving, kind of back to a product lens of like, what are we trying to solve so that is really clear. We can address friction points. The measurable outcomes has been a big focus over the last year. I think everyone got a lot of AI excitement, lots of tools were integrated, and then there weren't clear metrics for how we were going to measure outcomes and be able to validate that those tools were working as expected. One of the areas, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, is the risk that we're introducing. So as we think about integrating AI, especially into a regulated space like healthcare, we need to think about those compliance and regulatory components very heavily as we talk about adoption. And then how do we validate it and monitor it for the longer term? Evals is a big discussion right now. So being able to not only measure outcomes, but also measure how the tools are getting used and validate those components too. And so when we think about the leadership consensus and the right framework to consider for leadership, I think one of those components is really around the human-centered, which is part of what we're talking about on the talk here today. So the World Health Organization in 2024 came out with guidance on large multimodal AI in health. And as fast as they can put these kind of guidance components in place is as fast as the technology is developing. So, certainly a lot of review on agentic frameworks, but also a lot of look at autonomous agents that are operating at scale, and how do we do governance at scale for those types of agents. Looking at things that are risk tiered. So adoption is outpacing evaluation. We're really seeing that we need to have really strong oversight tools to be able to look at these components. And then workflow native, which I know we were just discussing, but we really need to start with like, what are we trying to solve? What's the business problem? And not the tool specifically, but then how are we going to then solve that problem natively?
Can I please ask a quick question here?
Sure.
Could you please expand a little bit on large multimodal AI in health? Contextualize it maybe, or tell us what you're talking about?
Yes. So there's agentic frameworks where, and there's a difference between automations and agents. Automations are where you're taking a process that you have a normal opportunity to start to automate some of the components away from humans. An agent component is where you are building an agent that can complete a task autonomously. So you're giving it guidelines, structure. It has like a very specific task that it's completing. And then there's a structure of agents. And so that's where like an MCP layer comes in, where you're managing an orchestration of agents. So you may have one entire workflow that constitutes 10 or 15 agents that you've built. And you need to figure out how you govern each individual component of that entire workflow across that space. So that's kind of where the agent orchestration piece really comes in, and part of what a lot of people are talking about is the difficulty in governance for that component. Yeah, and if anyone has anything else to add in on top of that, would love other components or other thoughts on.
Jen, nice to see you again. I was just wondering, what is the regulatory landscape from the government at this point looks like for each of these elements? Number one is for agentic AI, particularly in healthcare applications, as well as for customized LLM trained models.
Yeah, great question, Nancy. Good to see you. And I would say they are trying really hard to keep up. It's challenging because, as we all know, things are changing daily in the AI space. And so, part of what I've been discussing a lot in the last couple of years is it's really important for healthcare workers to have a seat at the table when we talk about regulation and when we talk about these components, because the technology people are brilliant in the development, but we need the healthcare people to be involved from that lens of governance and regulatory, and making sure that we're protecting patient privacy. I mean, we definitely see risks. And just this week, Anthropic had a big data leak that wasn't specifically in healthcare, but it's as the technology is getting more sophisticated, so is the ability for people to have bad behavior in terms of hacking and accessing information about people. And so in terms of the government regulations, they are like, and both in the US and worldwide, they are coming out with guidance as quickly as they can, but it's hard to keep up, I think, for anybody in this space. And so it's up to organizations to make sure that they are putting that governance in place from a responsibility standpoint at an individual company level too. Yeah, great question. And so I think when we look at healthcare data is another area that can be challenging across the board. And that's because there are no single clean data sets in healthcare, especially in the US. We have our clinical data, which is in the EMR, can be structured, it can be unstructured, tucked into PDFs, can be lab results and imaging reports. We have all of our behavioral data, which is in apps and engagement platforms, patient-reported data, all the mental health signals. And then we also have biometrics. So we all are monitoring our health through our Apple Watches, through our Oura Rings, through all of the different biometrics. And we now have more access to data about ourselves than ever before. And it makes it tricky in the healthcare system because it's fragmented, because all those data points are coming from different categories of data. And so as we think again about the regulatory components, understanding the privacy implications of that, where we're integrating data, how we're managing user data, who has control of the data, whether it's the patient or the organization, and how do we empower patients to be able to manage and control their data across all of these areas of healthcare. So I think the crux of the discussion is, what does AI-centered AI mean? And these are my thoughts, and would definitely love to hear everyone's thoughts around this too. When I think about human-centered AI, I definitely think about reducing burden. So where can we take all the tasks that are weighing the humans in healthcare down and remove those through automation and through these amazing technologies that we have access to? So the AI scribe is a great example of that. The return on investment for clinicians is very clear. It's a great way to utilize it that keeps them from having to stay up late and chart. And I think there's a lot of really great opportunities there. Keeping the humans in the loop. So as we think about tasks, where should humans be looping in to make sure that they're using their clinical judgment at the right place without AI moving forward on autonomous tasks when it's not appropriate. We've talked a lot about this, but designing for trust and consent. Consent is really important for patients to understand how AI is getting used in the system, for it to feel really clear where humans are being used versus where AI is getting used. Measuring real outcomes. So really looking at, are we reducing burnout? Is our note quality higher? Are we having good testing and not generic bookmark or benchmarks? Also, like, are we able to pull out more billing codes? Is our ability to generate revenue more consistent? Are we able to reduce just the overall burden on humans to allow them to do what they do best, which is that human connection with their patients? And then we always need to have a design for the patient. So consumer AI is huge. Lots of people use consumer AI, as we all did. I don't think I saw a single person who didn't say they were a daily user. And now how are we translating that into the healthcare field? And how are we able to optimize the consumer experience and also continue to keep an eye on safety? Would love to hear others' thoughts if there's things that you would add to this slide around what human-centered AI includes.
Um, I was just wondering, what's your thoughts on bringing that human experience in terms of human connections? Because there is this two focuses of bringing human into the loop to verify things, approve at the last point to make sure that there are no errors that is going to critically impact the system. But also, we also have to keep the human in touch with humans, particularly to improve human experience, right? Because we can't really communicate. We are not wired to communicate with the engines to create that experience, particularly for patients. So how do we balance these two?
Yeah, and it's a great question. And I think we are all still going to be figuring it out. My background has been in behavior change my whole career. So I have I have a propensity to, to really want to use humans for that human connection, especially at those moments in time where somebody is looking to make change in their health. So they're looking to change something, they're going through a shift in their health in some way. Those moments of human connection are incredibly important for the long-term outcome for that patient. And so the way I think about it is, what are all the things outside of that that we can take off the plate of the humans that are delivering healthcare in order to allow them to have more of those human moments with patients. But I think it's a great question that's still to be answered, and would love if anyone has other thoughts about that.
Jennifer, I think Sue had a comment or question for you. Please go ahead, Sue.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Jennifer. Thank you for addressing this topic, such an important topic. And I'm so glad people, more and more people are interested in talking about this. I just wanted to add some thoughts to what you've shared on this slide. I've been helping health tech companies kind of adopt AI and designing systems with human in the loop. And what I realized is that there is like a maturity model that emerges where one can understand what is the level of human in the loop that's required for a given solution. And there are different varieties of it. There's human in the loop. And I think as someone was, I think Ansi was earlier talking about human who is just in the loop to approve things, right? Like who's just in the loop to look at high potent things, important ones that they have to respond to if it was flagged off. They actually refer to that as human on the loop, which is basically they're not integrated in the process. But hey, if something goes wrong, they'll log in Monday morning and look at the report and approve it. And that's not a very effective way of building human in the loop. And so what I always say is, how do you design systems is you start with the human. So what are some functions that should not and be replaced by a system or a machine and still requires the human touch? And then design your AI workflows around that. And one good example was, I believe this was a research based on pathology department across certain hospitals in the US. So when they gave the AI access to pathology reports, it got 96% accurate. It was 96% accurate in its diagnosis. And when they gave it to like highly trained pathologists, they had 98% accuracy in predicting. But the real magic was putting them both together.
Yeah.
That led to 99.8% accuracy. So I think the future of what is AI in healthcare with human in the loop is AI being that invisible power that allows humans to do high strategy decisions. And I don't think there should be full automation, nor should it be just humans, because human on the loop is a typical example of, burnout. Because if you have to log in every morning and approve a couple things that your AI did, that can be exhausting. You're basically babysitting agents, right? So that's kind of how I think about human in the loop. I just wanted to share my thoughts.
I love that, and thank you so much for sharing. And I love that term, human on the loop. I have accidentally built myself workflows that were human on the loop, and you realize pretty quickly how annoying they are.
Yeah.
This is not what my intention was. But it's a great call out for where, starting with what do you want to preserve of that human connection, and what do you want to preserve for the humans, and then working your way out from there of like, okay, now what can we automate to allow that preservation to take place and allow people to spend more of their time in those categories that we recognize are essential for human connection.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, and just a quick chat too about like building high velocity teams as we think about this, and I know we've touched on some of these in other categories too. But speed without structure breaks. And we know that as all of these teams are moving fast in health AI, there are some things that should be considered. Clear outcomes is one of the things that I think everyone is leaning towards. There was a lot of excitement early on, and we all just kind of threw AI everywhere, including myself and all kinds of workflows. And then you realize, like, oh, is this actually an ROI for me, or did I just make it because it was cool? And it wasn't actually something that was taking very much of my time. And so is it right for automation, and really understanding what the problems are and where you can see clear outcomes. Having those tight feedback loops with real users early in the process. So being able to understand when you implement AI solutions, like, are they things that feel good to the users? Are they things that are understandable? Do they know that they're not talking directly to their clinician, that they're talking to an AI chatbot? And is that something that is the right timing for them to be able to do that? Clinical product and engineering, I would say this has never been a more important cross-functional component for how things should be structured. And that's really making sure that that clinician and that clinical person is in the decision-making process from the very beginning around how things are getting designed and how they're getting implemented into the system, with the look and the view towards privacy and security. And speed with accountability. So definitely we're all moving fast right now, but we also need to make sure there's really clear governance and how we're doing that.
And Jennifer, sorry to interrupt. I think Kimani has a question for you.
Great, sorry. And I'm sorry, I can't see when people raise their hands, but yeah, I would love to.
Thank you, Van, and thank you, Jennifer, for the session. It's very interesting, and I really like the way Sue mentioned about pathology and like how it was integrated and it's a better outcome. And I really like human on the loop instead of human in the loop, because being myself a physician, if I have to like sit Monday morning just approving things and then I have to see the patients, it would be very, very like exhausting. My question is around like I do think that for physicians it can be a good tool because they know they can understand when AI is hallucinating or like but on the patient end I'm very skeptical and stressed sometimes because it does hallucinate and sometimes patients are like for instance you share the data like uh, they avoided the follow up. So I'm very curious to know like do you think it's the responsibility of a company generating that AI? Like there should be up to that point a conversation like after this AI should stop responding. Like they
Mm.
should not respond to that thing and say like go talk to the physician. I'm not able to answer instead of just saying like this is not a medical advice or something. So what are your thoughts around it? So.
Yeah, great question. I am definitely on the side of a company should 100% be responsible for making sure that what they're rolling out to patients is responsible in that way. Because we do know there's hallucinations in LLMs, and there are things that you can do to reduce hallucinations through training and how you're prompting and what access you're giving, keeping your context window reasonable so that those those processes are able to function as ideally as possible. However, it's it should be the company's responsibility that you're directing patients into a human when things are going outside of what the scope is. And that's why as companies are integrating AI solutions, it's really important to leave plenty of time for testing and testing across the board, not just testing for the functionality that you are implementing that feature for, but you also want to test it for things like how does it handle it when a patient asks about suicidal ideation? How does it handle it when a patient asks about something that's not related to what you expect to be in the chat. And because those kind of edge cases are often the ones that that end up hallucinating or going outside of the guardrails that you've put in place for that feature. But yeah, I think that's it's a really important consideration. And I think we definitely have the weight of responsibility of making sure that we are releasing things out to patients that that are well regulated. And because things are moving so fast, I think it has to be on the responsibility of the companies who are developing those. You know, which is why we need to make sure that healthcare people are at the table across the whole space. And when technology companies like ChatGPT, for instance, roll into health, it brings up some concern to make sure, you know, to look at that and vet that and test and make sure that that they're being responsible with how they're managing users. Yeah. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on that too. That's an important distinction. Well, and I would say, you know, in terms of the risks around AI processes, there's certainly some that are large that need to be accounted for. One that we haven't talked about is bias and inequity. So the data for LLMs is trained on the data of the world, and that means that all of the healthcare research that's been done that we know has bias and disparities in it is what these tools are being trained on. And so as we're working towards how we're going to utilize them in process, we need to understand that the models are not trained right now on representative data, and that can worsen disparities in the categories. So it's an important correction that needs to be made as we look at how these tools are getting trained.
Yeah, if I can jump in on this bias aspect. So it's also not only that the data, that the models were trained on the worldwide data, data available on the internet, but more of it was trained on the English-speaking data, right? So it's the English language. And that creates the even bigger bias because those like from the Asia or European small languages or anything like that, it's also not included yet. And it's one of the problem while we should not rely on like ChatGPT, for example, because it's just built out of the corporation who were mining the data from the English speakers. Yeah, so.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that. Such an important point. It's it's not built across equitable research because we don't have equitable research, right? In across languages, across the world, across genders and ethnicities. That is not something that we have reached in terms of where that data is coming from.
Then I was also had noticed two different approaches when it comes to security for new companies. One is that we follow the standardized norms for software development and like put in all the layers of security in terms of what we host and what are the plugins that we use at a developer level. And then I also had seen like spoke to companies who exclusively provide AI securities for companies in healthcare. So I think that would be a huge effort. I think they might be using a combination of different, you know, elements of regulatory as well as the generalized AI compliance. So what do you see as some kind of a balance at that point for early stage companies?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, you know, kind of goes back to our discussion earlier. For early stage, the decisions need to be made around like build, buddy, buy. Like, are you planning to build this yourselves, or are there other companies that have already done this that it would make sense to partner with, you know, or if you're later stage to acquire so that you are utilizing what's already been built in the space? There are a lot of opportunities right now for partnership. You know, a lot of companies have built really amazing feature sets, really amazing products that that will save any company time, and often time is of the essence right now in terms of getting to market, getting to acquisition. Those roadmaps are much quicker than they were even 5 years ago. And so I do see partnership is often a very great opportunity, especially in things like data privacy. It's why companies like Databricks and Snowflake like blown up, and they're huge because they've found a way to capture data, to be able to build data pipelines, and then to integrate AI tools within it. And they've moved into the healthcare space successfully.
Jennifer, Christine has a question for you.
Great.
I think I was partially answered or touched on a bit, but I think some of these questions of disparity actually dovetail quite nicely with these issues of those edge cases we were talking about. If someone gets off topic or asks something that's unexpected, at least in the space that we're working with and how I'm sort of like beta testing things, trying to like think how do we create this chatbot that isn't going to do iatrogenic harm to folks who are early in a mental health journey. Like I think we need to think of those as being one and the same, because I think a lot of those um, non-responses you may get from an LLM are attempts at addressing bias and guardrails that sort of backfire, frustrate the user. And it has me wondering how much of that 58% of folks who don't follow through and book an appointment with a clinician has to do with that. We really need to, I think it's your several people are hitting on some interesting and essential points that we need to start involving end users in the development process as early as possible to address this, because it's simply not realistic. It's simply not possible to try and build an efficient tool, that works nice and clean, and then go back and deal with the messiness of different cultural barriers, where it be language, this kind of stigma here, that kind of stigma there. What does the Black community face? What do civilian male PTSD patients deal with? If there's, in many cases, for instance, if you're not a military veteran, there's no way to get assessed for PTSD. If you're male, all these things just need to be, like, I think, built in as much as possible, whether we're doing this for profit or nonprofit, from the get-go. So
Absolutely. Yeah. And such an important point about pulling in end users early, and all the different ways that bias and inequity can come into this space. And we definitely need to account for those as we're going through training and understanding what we're building and how that's going to impact the end user.
So sorry, that just reminded me of a additional question I had that I kind of put in the chat earlier. If you found that different organizations have had better luck, building on top of something like Claude, which has, say, some decent guardrails in there, and trying to modify it, or just saying, screw it, this particular area is delicate enough that we need to build a corpus from scratch, from well-validated research. Of course, if you're worried about investment return on investment from a profit perspective, that's one thing. But if we're trying to get a high quality product, there's sort of, how do you balance that? And are there people kind of exploring the pros and cons of those different approaches?
Yeah. Great question. And I would say the responsible path forward is to always partner with companies in healthcare that you have a BAA with, and that are SOC 2 certified, HIPAA compliant for development. So certainly those are great people to partner with. I know, Google Gemini, you can utilize in the healthcare space through a BAA. There's companies that are doing a lot of voice work like Hippocratic AI that are, have a very close eye towards compliance and regulation and that are regulated. So I think that should be part of the process as you're evaluating what you want to build and the feature set and whether you want to partner or build it from scratch. There's tons of partnership opportunities, and that should be part of the process for evaluation before you move to a partnership is what's compliance and what's been well tested and are these good partners in the healthcare space specifically.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for your wonderful talk and for coming and sharing your knowledge with us. We're just going to start wrapping up. And yeah, I just wanted to quickly talk to you about our upcoming events. The next one is a webinar with Dr. Lei Sing from Stanford. He's going to talk to us about biomedical imaging and data analysis in the age of AI. And then on April 28th, we have a pitch event in San Francisco at Perkins Coie. And we're inviting founders, executives to apply to pitch. So far, I think we have about 15 applications, and we're inviting more founders to apply. And out of the cohort, we'll pick 5 startups to present on the day of. And VCs, angel investors are going to be there to give you feedback. So please do come and join us. With that said, we're at the top of the hour. So thank you, everyone, so much for your attention. And I'll see you again really soon.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.